Hi and welcome to Hospitality Huddles. I'm Scot Turner and each episode we'll be uncovering the industry's biggest challenges and serving up the solutions to help overcome them. We're bringing together some of the best thought leaders in the industry and finding some of the most creative minds shaping the future of hospitality from all around the world. They're going to share insights tackling the pain points operators just like you face every day. Hospitality Huddles is more than a podcast, it's a community of passionate individuals who appreciate the art and science of hospitality and want to help answer the difficult questions. If you like the show, one of the best ways to support us is to hit that subscribe button and leave a review. It's only going to take a couple of minutes and it really does make the difference. So let's get on with today's episode, and all that's left to say is welcome to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation, one huddle at a time. We're going to talk about why every restaurant needs a podcast today. And this is going to go out in podcast format on Hospitality Huddles, but I thought we'd try going live on Instagram for the first time that I've done it. So anything could go well, everything could go wrong here. But everyone should see that you turned up in the Peaky Blinders hat just for this chat because we're sitting here in London, right?
I ordered one just for you. And I got over, like I do have, just so you know, your followers over in the motherland, I call it. My family is from England. Like I have, my last name's Ashton, right? And then my mom's last name is Black. So that's a little bit in the Irish side. So Irish English background.
What can you say? You're part of the family now, right? Part of the family.
No, exactly.
And then we should tell people when we both logged on and I brought you up on stage, there was Dire Straits in the background. We had a conversation about whether Dire Straits were British and then realised that Mark Knopfler was the lead artist. And I can't believe that because my dad used to listen to Dire Straits and Mark Knopfler all the time. So that is embarrassing. Anyway, on with why we're here. Jay, we're here today because I read a post from you the other week and we'd had a conversation on a couple of conversations before and I'd heard you talking when I was on your late night show about why every restaurant should have a podcast in 2024. And do you know what? I was one of those people that sat and procrastinated over doing a podcast for a long time and I'm really glad I am. So I thought it'd be really cool to just jump on a chat and talk through because you are the master of podcast. So why don't you just have a little look? Why don't you take 2 minutes to talk to us about who you are, what you do, and how many podcasts you have, how many podcast shows that aren't podcast shows that are definitely not podcast shows you do as well. And then we can chat about why every restaurant needs a podcast.
Sure. So I it's funny because I believe I haven't been in the industry long, but I am just coming up on my 34th year in the restaurant industry. So I've been doing this a long time and been able to really have a great career in this industry. So I've been in the industry 34 years. I work for one of the largest food companies in the world as their brand activation manager. And then I have spent most of my career just helping restaurants. And I've worked with thousands of restaurants, from everything from coaching to consulting and doing everything else in between. I've really dedicated most of those years, 20 of those years to helping restaurants and with their businesses and stuff like that, and integrated that into the company. And built a huge team across the country in Canada and really influenced what we do today. And you see it popping up once in a while, other companies trying to do it and stuff. So it is kind of cool. But I have really started podcasting in 2020 during the pandemic. We were kind of doing webinars prior to that. And we were doing, we called it Webinar Wednesday. We were doing one, maybe two a month, I think it was. And it was literally like the starting ground of a podcast. It was really simple. Having guests on, we would ask questions. And if you had slides, everyone has to have slides in a webinar. we would do it that way. And it was very early podcast stages for us. I really didn't listen to podcasts. I heard about them, but I never really was interested in doing them. And then it shifted a lot when the pandemic hit, that we looked at how do we get the message out there? How do we connect with people in this easy mobile format, right? So we could get on their phones. So I started that in 2020. May 14th was the first day that we started our first show. And we literally started from our garage to, you name it, wherever else, and really started building upon that. So you go through all the, and then we built a network model. So it was like Netflix for podcast within the companies that I work with. And we had about 27 different shows on the network. We were producing up to, 2 a day for the channel, and just hammered it. I don't recommend that, by the way. It's a lot of work. And just hammered it and really learned. Like, I think that's the biggest thing that I would say to anyone that's getting into this space, especially as a restaurateur or chef. It's okay to make mistakes. That's the best part about podcasting, is that you can make a lot of mistakes and no one's going to be upset about it, or even most of the time don't even know. And I'll tell you what I told everyone down in on Sean's show yesterday, down in with Kelly Barbecue and his media company. I'll tell you that in a second, because it made everyone on the show laugh of what one of my holy smoke or situations that happened. But so speed up to today, I have 3 of the top 10 podcasts in our industry in Canada right now, streaming. And then I have a new one that we started, and we just did it again last night from New Jersey, is every late night show. We do a late night show, 9:30 Eastern time in Canada and the United States. And we have guests from all over, you name it. We have guests. We talk about the industry. We use AI to generate the topic during the guest, and it shows have a little fun with AI. And we have a really just loose conversation about the restaurant industry in relation to what AI has told us to talk about. So we have a lot of fun with that. And that one we see, you can sometimes tell the traction is going to do well. I always say the DNA works out. Sometimes you try to make things work, and it's just you know what, it just ain't going to be a good show, or it's not going to be the right guest, or it's not going to be the right host. But when we look at that in reference to the restaurant industry, I really believe every restaurant needs a podcast. And why I say that all the time, and why I write about it, and why I put it into my newsletter and everything else all the time, is a restaurant has so many layers of stories, and they produce a story almost every day when they're open. And they have they have the right DNA. When you look at the checklists that you need to have as a successful show, you have it's the perfect opportunity. And I believe so many restaurants, as they go through, even starting today, let's say, there'll be stories being created in restaurants today. And you see, even recently, the TV show The Bear has won a lot of these awards, Golden Globes and all these different things. They've won all these awards, and they have a very realistic show format, using Maddie Madison and stuff, and really built it that way. And I'm like, well, people, look, it's telling you something. Real live kind of formatted shows work, and that's a TV show. Well, you don't need that. We can just plug in and do this every day and tell stories about what was the struggle today, what's happening. The list is, I just posted 47 reasons this week on my LinkedIn channel of 47 reasons why people should why a restaurant should have a podcast. And it's crazy, Scott. The list is huge on why a restaurant needs a podcast. And then you get into the challenges. Why don't they do a podcast, right? And you can come up probably with another 47 reasons why not to do it. But as you look at the podcast space growth, it's almost it's getting to the point, like, remember when restaurants, when social media came in and we all said you have to be active on social media if you're a restaurant, or you own a restaurant, you need a Facebook page, you need a website page. Well, guess what? I truly think you're going to need a podcast page soon, because those other channels are becoming saturated with a lot of content that we don't believe. We got AI bots coming into that space. We've got a lot of different things that are impacting the content to actually be trusted. Podcast, I think, is one of the last, and there might be something else that comes out over the next few years. Podcast is like one of the last believable, trusted marketing. In my mind, it is definitely a marketing channel. A marketing channel that we all believe in the content that is produced. Very rarely you'll hear people going, that podcast isn't right. They don't believe in anything, and they're fake, and all this stuff. You don't do that. You put your earbuds in and you listen to the most tentative moment of when you're listening. Like you're engaged probably more than reading a magazine, or seeing a billboard, or reading looking at social media. You're more engaged than ever in a podcast style, and I can't think of anything else better than that. I think possibly leveraging TikTok as a podcast channel, because they allow for that 10-minute model. If you built your podcast model into TikTok, I think you do so well as a restaurateur. You get into the right algorithms and everything else. And then also, I just recently, about 3 weeks ago, I think before you came on my show, it might have been after, Scott, I actually interviewed the first podcaster on the planet. And Paul, yeah, it was really cool. He started, his first podcast was done, I think it was 2005 or 2004. Anyway, Paul was the first one to have a podcast, and we interviewed it. So he's telling me today that we're going to see some decentralization of podcasting, meaning we will not need Apple or Spotify or those podcast hosting places to really have where we can build out. It'll be decentralized, and a lot of companies are getting a little nervous about that. Apple's getting a little nervous about that. And there'll be different ways that restaurateurs can actually, or people doing podcasts can actually get make additional income. Like there'll be a little bit easier ways to make income off a podcast, which is, I find, kind of interesting as well. And that's projected, what he said, 18 months. So I'm going to say 17, because that was last month, to go until we really see podcast even take. And you know what, when you think about it, at the end of the day, you are going to probably see not a rebirth of podcasts, but a shift on how podcasts have been. Because like our format, that even that we're doing today, this has been done since 2005. So we're going to probably see everyone always challenges status quo, like tried to change it up. Some people are streaming it live, which I think is cool as well. But when I get back into look at a restaurant, the amount of content that became produced fast, easy, very low cost. Why would you not? And then also to record it forever, right? And to keep it and to have it cataloged, and to have those stories cataloged, and to look at, going back, like if you did 30 shows and you go back to the first one, go, oh, look, remember this? Like, or, 2 years later or 3 years later, and you're able to go back and look at what you had cataloged with all those things. That is incredible. And as we all hear, content is king. And if you have all your verticals and podcast becomes a new one, I think it'd be awesome. There's my spiel.
No, for sure. And there's so many things in there that I want to pick out. But I guess the first one, and you can answer this in a minute, would be like, if someone's listening to this now, what is a podcast in its simplest form? And then I guess the way to look at a podcast after that, and the way I've started looking at podcasts, and it was kind of reaffirmed when I read your 47 reasons why, is it's almost a place where you can, it's just another media outlet. So if you're launching a new menu, you might write a PR story, you might take some photography, you might do some video. This could potentially be something that sits there as an audio format that one of your regular guests is listening to on the way into work, where you have your chef going, this is the new menu, talking through it, explaining it from his passion, what that might look like. And that's a huge opportunity, isn't it? So I think what your 47 reasons did was it broke that podcast thing down in terms of it not necessarily being the format like we're in now, Q&A, but just going onto a format like this that's live, that might go on TikTok, might go on Instagram, that you can then pull the audio from and put it onto a different format. Because, you know, I'm one who I won't necessarily look at TikTok every day, but I'll always listen to podcasts because it's just easy when I'm on the tube on the way in and stuff like that. So it's just another way to find people, isn't it? So what, like, in its simplest form, what is a podcast? Is it an audio story, an audio conversation, or can it be more than that? How would you define it?
Great question. I look at podcasts in a way, I look at kind of different, like there's the storytelling, right? There is the interview style. There is I call it like the history, the history model. I think there's really, 2 or 3, maybe 4 different models of what a podcast is. You can have a panel talk model, where you're having multiple different people on there. You can have a one-on-one interview style. I really, at the end of it, it is an opportunity to capture a conversation in the rawest form. I'm not a big editor. Well, I do edit nowadays more than I ever did in the past, but it is probably the purest form of a conversation or a dictation of what you're wanting to tell your listeners or your guests. And you hit it, Scott, when you said like other means of where it sits and how you use it. If you pull the file from your podcast and put it up on your website, well, I believe it will help your SEO on your website because you have people sitting on there for 10, 20 minutes listening to your podcast off your website. And that is huge, right? Like how long have you sat on a restaurant's website? Maybe a minute or 2 looking at the menu. So I think it helps in multiple, like you have to get a little bit innovative, let's say, or think outside the box of how to use a podcast opposed to just an interview style, right? Like you can use it as an interview style, which I do also recommend. Like I think interviewing a restaurant's guests, how cool would that be? That you're in a restaurant. Like I just think about it. Like, and I have a couple coming out here with restaurants, but like one of the things I envision is that you have a booth almost dedicated to podcasts on a Friday night, and you got that background sound going on. It's busy. It's hyped. You got your, first of all, people are attracted to podcasts and you see it in a restaurant. What's going on with all these mics and these cameras and lights? And you literally have a booth set up or a table, and you have a guest over and they've been invited because they're one of your best guests. And you sit down and for 10 minutes, let's say it's a 10, 15-minute conversation, because podcasts can also vary in length. There's no rules. And you can sit there and listen to someone. It's almost like that user-generated content, like the what we're looking for, but it's in a pure format. And you could sit with them and have a conversation about like, so you're one of our best guests. Tell us a little bit more about your experience through my restaurant. And when like I'm just going, holy cow, everyone needs this, because you're sitting there and you're hearing someone talking about your restaurant. And if you do it right without scripting, you gotta be careful, make sure it is a blend of format with freestyle, is you're going to get a pure fucking response from your guest. And how awesome is that? Like, and then you have that cataloged with a little blend of other topics inside your podcast, like all the different shows. you got our so-and-so's guest. You cannot tell me that that guest, as soon as they hear themselves on your show, isn't going to share that with another 100 people or put it on their social channels and say, hey, listen to me. I was on so-and-so's, listen to this pod. Like, they're going to run around and tell everyone. And they should, because it's awesome to have someone talk about your restaurant. And I think about, so that's why I think like a podcast to me is really a pure, authentic conversation or a dictation or a story that people get to listen to on their time. Like, it's that on-demand model. And I really believe there's strength in that. We know companies are investing more in this space left and right. I think from a restaurateur is that you have to look at it, because you have to consider it. Let's put it that way. You have to, I think you should consider it, because the cost of it is so low, and your return, I believe, will come from doing something like that. Definitely not an overnight Joe Rogan moment. You're not going to have that. It's the reality. It's a long marathon, but it's worth it. It really is.
Yeah, I think the same. It's funny. I shared this conversation the other day actually with Heather Cox when we were doing an episode, and I was listening to Gary Vee on the way into central London one day, and it was one of his podcasts last week, and it was like, this is what you should be doing in 2024, the one thing you should do, and his whole thing was going live, right? So I was intrigued by this whole thing of we should be going live. So I started like looking into what he was doing more and more, and he every so often, or I think it's like every week or something, he goes on Twitch, and he is in the boardroom with all his team, and he goes live, and they basically do the team meeting, and every now and again someone might ask a question, and they'll break off the meeting and go answer the question, and then they'll come back and what have you. But it was so authentic. Yeah, there was some staging, of course there was. It was Gary Vee, right? But there was the authenticity there. You thought you were in the boardroom with him. You thought you were having conversations, and people were just getting engaged. And I had the conversation with some clients, and I'd repeated the whole thing. We have to go live in 2024. So this Friday, let's get on the TikTok. Let's put a tripod up and let's just film the restaurant.
Yeah.
Like, who cares what they see? Who cares if a guy stands in front of it for 5 minutes? It is what it is. It's live.
Yeah.
And they were really nervous about like GDPR over here, which, sometimes you wish you were in the States. They were worried about what people would think. It's not in the brand tone of voice. It's not in the brand image. And it was like, everything I do when I speak to people when we're doing recordings and episodes, everyone always says, there's a couple of words that always come up. Be genuine always comes up. Yep. Be authentic always comes up. And storytelling is starting to come into every single conversation. And I just think that's what live can bring. And if that live can then transfer into an audio format that can be listened to in the car or on the way in, it's so cool. I just have visions of like the chef and the bartender, menus, the sommelier talking about wine pairings with the food menu, and really authentic thing, right? And I just think it's got so much value in just like you said, taking some of that content that's really hard sometimes to get on photo, on video, and just go live and just be authentic, and then find a way. Like say now we're using StreamYard now. And I'm going to ask you more about software soon. We're on StreamYard. We're streaming live on Instagram. We can go live onto YouTube. We can go live onto LinkedIn. We can go live onto X if we want to. So we're going to do this now. And what I'm going to do afterwards, when we've stopped, it's going to give me the audio files. It's going to give me the video files. We can share the video files and cut it up, whatever we want to do shorts. Yeah. And then I can take the audio file. I'm going to put it onto my podcast platform that then sends it out to Apple, Spotify, Amazon, blah, 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 blah. And then from that, I take the transcript. I put it through AI. I generate a blog that goes onto the website that's going to tell everyone why they should have a podcast. And I've got all that from this one conversation that right now, if we make a mistake, if we say something crazy, like it's online, who cares, right? But that's how easy it could be to do it. No,
isn't that the beauty of it, Scott? It's the beauty of it. Like, it's multi-purpose. Like I'll do one show, and like you said, you'll You can do it. You can pull it from here. You get your chunks for social. You have so much. And when you think about the restaurant industry, so one of the things that I find very interesting, and maybe you've had this, is nothing is worse than having a guest that's just forced almost to do the show, that opposed to just interviewing interesting people and hearing their story. Well, I don't think I've ever met a restaurant that doesn't have multiple interesting people either working at it or going to it, right? Like chefs are so interesting to tell their story, their journey. Get a pint into them, you're going to have hours of content, right? Like there's just so much that you can gain from the people in the business. And like you said, talking about a menu, like talk about the journey of building the menu or redoing the menu, or what it took, the empathy and the understanding of what it means to run a restaurant or what it means to do a menu might be understood a little bit more if we tell the story. And maybe there's people going, I had no idea it took that long to introduce just one dish or what went into a dish. And as we get into more complex dishes of, the origins of where it came from, or what was the farmer that raised the meat, or all these different things that are behind it, there's so much. Like you could even interview the farmer that have your local products or produce in there, and then they're repurposing that on their channels. And like, do you see, I hope you see the light on this, because the more I keep talking about it, I think it's incredible that restaurants are missing an opportunity here. Now, here's my vision. I'll share my vision, trademark it as well. But I believe that, so now when you get into it, the only, I think, thing that we need to develop, and maybe we could do this as a side hustle, Scott, is that we need a place where they all live. And when I look at, and I don't know how Yelp is over in England, in London, is that I foresee a location where they're all stored for our industry. So you would go to, let's say I'm going, like for us in Canada, if I'm going to a different city, I could, as a interest into that space, and you'd have to market out this holding location, or network. And I could pick the restaurants that are on there and then go to their podcast. Like it's almost like a review in a way, but instead it's like, listen to these restaurant stories. And you could, I want to go to this place because, man, I listened to the podcast the other day and blah, blah, blah. They have a new menu, or I listened to this. Now, the interesting thing too, on top of that, so as you gain guests to follow you on social, and that's, I think, a goal as a restaurateur or owning a restaurant, you want people to follow you or like your stuff. Well, as soon as they follow your podcast, let's say as a restaurateur, and you got people going, you say, you know what, we launched this new podcast. We'd love for you to listen to it. Oh, just wait, Scott, there's so much here, because you can also advertise at your tables, your takeout containers and everything. Listen to our new podcast. You could QR code it. So they're sitting there at the table. And if you go into a restaurant today, 99.9% of the people are sitting on these things on our phones at the tables and sitting there looking at, social media usually, or whatever it is, they're on their phones. And you could say, well, while you're sitting there waiting for, having a meal, because most people are not talking to whoever you're invited to, you could actually click and listen to the podcast. Or you can advertise, hey, listen as a family, everyone download it on your phone at the table. You could download it at the table. Now, why I say that's, I think, very neat, if you can get that, is that every time you release a show, what happens to your phone? It lights up saying, so-and-so's Barbecue Shack just dropped a new show. Like, that's insane. Like, and their phone lights up and your logo shows, and all of a sudden you got your brand. And if you're wearing an Apple Watch, the whole plate of the Apple Watch lights up with your logo. It's got how much money would that cost restaurants to get that much brand awareness of that location out to those people? You're doing that for nothing almost. It's a very next to nothing, like a couple mics and a processor, and subscribing to StreamYard or whatever site that you want to. Like, I can't even think about how much that would cost if you're looking at how can I get that much brand awareness from a restaurant out to the public. It would cost zillions of dollars, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's exactly the point, isn't it? You're right. And I'm a big believer in repetition. So I'm a big believer in wherever people are consuming content and consuming information, you need to find a way to get there. So people go onto Google and they search for your restaurant. There's the Google business. They go onto social media and there's your page there. They go onto website. There's something sitting there. Yeah. They go, wherever it might be. So the podcasting is the natural evolution, isn't it? That you think, when you really think about it, like how I go onto the podcast, I listen to Apple podcasts. I'm an Apple guy, unfortunately, but and it's interesting. I was literally just trying to find out how many podcasts were downloaded on Spotify in 2023, which is difficult, but it's got 4.7 million podcasts in its lineup. Apple has 2.5 million, which is, it just goes to show Spotify is where people prefer. But where was I on this? I go on there every day. So if someone isn't coming up on my feed now, like, they're missing a trick, aren't they? Back to what you were saying, and you're absolutely right. When that pops up as a notification, when it comes on Apple Watches, and how it's so easy to save as well, is every time I go down every day, the ones I'm downloaded and subscribed to, and I save the episodes I want to listen to based on the title and who it is and et cetera, and then I then go back into it and choose what I want to listen to. So say I download some of yours, I download Sean's stuff. Like, every day I see a picture of Sean on my saved thing because I'm getting round to it in between soccer and in between Diary of a CEO and stuff like that. So that repetition, even if no one listens to the episode, the repetition of seeing your brand there is a perfect example, isn't it? And, there's Charlie Eblin, Single Tree Nation, perfect example of how you just keep seeing Single Tree Nation coming up all the time, and it's a great example, isn't it?
Well, it is. And when you look at it, I think you have to be a little over the top. I don't know if over the top it is, but you have to be very present in today's marketing space to have a brand stick. You're getting hit with so many brands, with big brands and everything else, and you have to be so repetitive in that brand and pushing your brand out and looking at multiple channels or verticals. And what a great way just to have so much content going out. And the nice thing about podcasts is you can dial it up. Well, you might say, you know what, we're going to do one a week, or we're going to do two a week, and we're going to be creative, and we're going to interview guests one day, or we're going to interview the staff one day. Starbucks had two podcasts at the time in Canada here. I don't know if they have it over there, but they had one that they would talk about Starbucks, like it was more of an inform style podcast. And then they had an employee podcast. Now, this is brilliant. I have to give credit where credit's due. This is crazy. Not only do I love their coffee, but I love their podcast idea. So what they did, and I always say that when we talk about labor in our industry, I always say, like, we have to take a little bit of ownership in the problem in labor in the industry of food service, because we don't do a good enough job telling people how awesome it is to work in this industry. We show scary shows. We show this environment of screaming at people, or this environment working late and making no money. We show the ugly side of the industry. We don't show the good side of the industry. And that's what Starbucks did, is they interviewed their staff. So every episode is a different person talking about how awesome it is and what Starbucks did to move them forward within their career, or how awesome it is to work at Starbucks. And you can listen to them, and they were genuine, and they were so good. And I'm like, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. You ever see Starbucks with 10, 12 people in there? Like, there's a reason why. It's a great place to work. So they captured that. They did that. And I thought that was brilliant. And you could do that as well. Like, there's no rule that says restaurant, like, you can interview your staff or your chef that's been there and say, hey, how is it to work here? And he's going to tell you how it is, I think there's so many ways to look at how you can leverage it and how you can build it off. Now, do you want me to tell you how to make money at it?
Let's do it. Let's do it, right?
Because a restaurant wouldn't probably say, no, I don't want to make extra money.
No, let's turn this into a revenue source, because I'm a big believer in every restaurant should have at least 5 revenue streams that is producing at any one time. And if one drops off, you've still got 4 left. So let's make podcast one of those revenue streams. Let's go for it.
Well, that's when shit changes, right? Is when then you make money at. So here's how you do this. So one thing is on podcast is that you can actually ingrain commercials or ad reads. So I would go out to the companies that are selling you food or selling your beer or whatever it is that you're putting into your restaurant, and using those platforms to advertise on and sell those commercials to your vendor partners or your companies that are selling your stuff there. So get them to support your podcast. You could sell, like over here, I would say most restaurants easily could do $1,500, $2,000 a commercial for a 30-second ad read or commercial integrated into your show. And you could probably do I've seen an increase in commercials lately on podcast. So I would say you could probably do easily 2 to 3. So you're looking at an extra $6,000 off of one podcast. Got to sell a lot of food, Scott, to make that much profit. Right? So that is what you do. And you think about that now becomes a new revenue stream for your business. You can advertise you could take the content from your podcast, build a newsletter. You could sell advertising within that newsletter, in that article of what it is. You could have different shows brought to you by X company. So you could sell the show to them. Right. Today's show at Jay's Bistro is brought to you by Kraft Heinz. And, we're very happy to have Kraft Heinz products in our restaurant today. We love those products. They're awesome. Make sure you use them in your restaurant as well. You become almost like an endorsement for those products. So then I would definitely sell that a little bit more money than your commercials, because you have overall branding, and then just add their logo to your overall, to your show, like in the corner or whatever of your advertising. So there's multiple ways that you can monetize it. Now, if you get into the monetization of like downloads and stuff like this, where other people will ask to advertise on your show for an X amount of dollar of click per listen, like how much, they'll give you like 5 cents per listen or whatever it is. You can actually make money if you get it going really good on your podcast. You can actually have StreamYard and other companies paying you for that as well. Then you could upload it to YouTube, which YouTube has a podcast channel. So if you have a YouTube channel for your restaurant, which I also recommend every restaurant having that, you could actually do that as well. You could endorse products on your show. You could do tasting podcast where chefs are tasting the products, reviewing the products. You can make a fortune probably off of a podcast for your restaurant on multiple different ways to monetize it. Best thing probably to really simply do it is write out what you're doing on your plan for your podcast or your restaurant, throw it in AI and ChatGPT and ask it how to monetize it. Give me 10 ways to monetize it, and chat will probably tell you. And probably more than I have.
I mean, if we strip it back, we've been doing this in the industry for years, right? Like I was always taught by our food and beverage group food and beverage director once. Every bottle behind the bar should be making you money when you're not selling it. And the chefs, they said all our chef's jackets were always sponsored by someone. All of our, when you're doing food, you give that. So we've been selling retail space as such for years, haven't we? Now it's just about how do we transfer that into a media situation? Because arguably for them as a supplier, you're going out to a much bigger reach on a podcast than you are sitting behind a bar with young
100%.
guests coming in, this goes out to far greater people, doesn't it? So there's definitely a way to kind of reach out to some of those current suppliers and look at how you can start working together. I had a conversation with Lightspeed, and I know you know Lightspeed as well. And I was with the country manager and the partnerships manager here in the UK. We're having a conversation because I'm a big advocate for Lightspeed, and I was talking to him about the podcast and just saying, you know what, we have the podcast as well. It goes out. Listen, it's about helping people to think differently and doing things others, and wouldn't it be great to get involved and what have you? And he was there like, why don't we create a podcast studio in the office here that people from hospitality can just come and use, and that could be our added value. And it's like, people get it. It's just about how we deliver it and how people can do it, can't they? But listen, to when I watch people like yourself going to trade shows, when I watch people like Sean going to trade shows, taking a couple of mics, a camera and a light, and just literally rocking up and having conversations, and it might be 10, 15-minute short bites with like super knowledgeable people. People can deal with the background stuff. People can deal with the fact that the sound might be a bit up and down, because the knowledge and the value that comes through is just so good. It's overrides everything else, doesn't it? It's about giving, it's about informing, it's about sharing knowledge, and that's the bit that people will buy into, not everything else, right?
Oh, it's the Gary V. Gary V does it. Listen to his podcast. It's all over. And sometimes the audio is great. Sometimes it's not. It might be on stage. He's recorded. It's all about the content, I believe. And I think I think a lot of people forgive the fact sometimes that the audio cuts in if you're at a show or your background. It's not perfect. As long as the content is so good and valuable, they forget about that part. And you almost forget about that. And that's the difference, I also think, that we're seeing the shift from the radio talk shows that are so perfect and molded and everything else is perfect to even believe those, to someone that's at an event and saying, we're just having a conversation. I think it's pure. I think it will continue to grow. The other thing I was going to mention is when you look at where I think a lot of restaurants just need that helping hand to get going. And I was thinking about this, is like someone probably said to someone way back in the day, hey, let's get a website or let's put you on Google or just try to get a website or get you on social. And someone, do I have to do this? And as soon as you get that first person, the second one going, the third one, I think it becomes that snowball effect, and you'll have everyone saying, you know what, I have a podcast, here's what it is. It's just starting that and being consistent of it. No different than social. You have to be consistent of putting content on your social channels. So I think it's the same way. But I just think the multiple difference. So I was thinking about you the other day, just saw on doing podcasts for hotels. Do you imagine hotels? Like the multi-layer conversations from a motel, a resort, having a podcast, make, a little studio at a resort where people are flying in from all over the world, that are getting on a podcast. And then you start looking at them reusing that content on their channels, or a celebrity comes into your restaurant and you're like, hey, let's throw the mics up on the table. Or I have never really encountered someone that has said, I don't want to tell my story. I think the thing maybe attracts me was I grew up in the world of having a coffee with someone and talking with them, right? Like back in the day, that was so normal. Like it was for us here, which maybe it's my British ties, is Saturday was going to the mall. We're going to the mall, and my parents would spend most of the time not even shopping, but it was a gathering place in the cafe to have a conversation with their friends. And there was no phones then. And it was this sit down, grab a coffee, and have a conversation. And I think what podcasts are, I wouldn't say forcing us to do, but it's almost like, guess what we've done for 43 minutes, Scott? We haven't looked at these. We haven't touched these. You can see all the messages coming through on mine. We haven't touched these. We're actually forcing ourselves to actually remember, like, do those actions again, to have a coffee with you, which I am right now, and having a conversation with it. And we're cataloging it. And I go back to my dad and stuff. And I always wish he was around today because he'd be an ultimate podcaster because he told stories nonstop. Like it was just a story. Every word out of his mouth was a story. And those conversations he was always having with his friends, I was always there on the side listening. But those are what we're doing today, right? Like we're having those one-on-one conversations with people. And I see restaurant like if you sat down with with one of your customers or a chef or whoever in your restaurant doing a podcast for your restaurant, and you spent 30 minutes with them, who does that today? It's very rare. Like we think it's actually something that we have to teach people how to have a coffee with someone today. And it's probably on LinkedIn Learning somewhere how to have a conversation with someone without your phone in your hand. This is what this does. And I think that's also a beautiful thing that podcasts are forcing us to do is once again, having a talk.
Yeah. And I think you've just finished with a beautiful point there, which is about people and staff, because it's also about, this is about letting your staff tell stories, letting your staff be authentic, letting your staff show that you're a great place to be. And I spoke to a guy called Ollie last week from a brand here called Pizza Pilgrims, and he's been brilliant at employee branding and storytelling for years. And it was very much around like, how do you get the people to say what's going on in the business, because it has much more impact. And don't be scared about, back to that point again, what we were saying before. I reached out to someone, I won't say which big hotel brand it was, but it was one of the biggest, and I was like, listen, come on the show, because it was a data analyst, I think. I was like, come on the show and talk to us about how you analyze 3,000 hotels across the world, because it's just a great subject. And he was like, oh, I'm not allowed to do it. Why are you not allowed to do it? You come on the show and you show what level of detail you as a business go into. It's going to make your business look so much better because you show what you do to focus on.
You're proud of it, eh?
Exactly. This poor guy wasn't allowed to come and talk to it. So let your people, don't stage stuff. Don't make people scripts. Don't put people in brand tone of voice and all this. Yes, it has to feel like you and it has to have it, but you can do an intro and an outro for that. Like let people be alive, right? Let people be free.
Well, you're right. And I've done them at events where you'll have someone walk up and go like, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, hey, I'm live right now. Like, and that's okay. I always say, my line is, do you have a cat or a kid, and put them in the background? And that's the beauty of it. There's no rules. And maybe that's why I love podcasting so much, is that there's no rules. There isn't a book of podcasting rules. There's some guidance of making what makes a good podcast, but at the end of the day, there's really no rules of what it is. And I think that's also going to attract people to allow them to be creative of interviewing guests or their staff or themselves, right? And what we believe today, I believe more and more people are attracted to people and their stories and their self brands than they are attracted to corporation brands. And I think when you look at that, of us believing in the companies that we work for, the more that we can get people to tell us about themselves, it actually gets those companies to hook onto those people. And we become a face of that company. And people believe in people. Like we believe in a person. I always say like a bank, I'll use a bank analogy, but do you believe when a bank is on TV of what they're saying? And 99% of the time, all the presentations I've done, no one believes what the banker is saying on the TV. But in a podcast and you're interviewing someone, you're probably going to believe everything that they're telling you. And that's the beauty of it. And I just really believe every restaurant needs one. They need to look at it in the simplest form and build it into their plan. And if you can make money at it, which I know you can through that, it's another revenue stream for you. And I really think as we actually did a show last night talking about revenue streams with the restaurants. Won't get into that, but why not, right? The margins are so thin today. Let's have another channel, like you said, Scott, have multiple different sources coming in to make you money. This is a simple, easy way, multi-layered ways of building your brand And I think it's really something that we'll see more of, hopefully more of.
100%. So listen, if people have been watching on Instagram, which is cool, right? But this is going to go out on the Hospitality Huddles podcast as well. Like, what do you have to do to set up a podcast? A couple of mics, like get them on Amazon. Sound.
Yeah. I have a box. I actually have it out because we're doing shows right now for an event in Winnipeg. It's in Winnipeg right now, but there's a box right now on Amazon. I think it's made by Zoom. The company's called Zoom. It's not the same. I don't think it's the same company that does Zoom, but it's a little box, and I think it's $100. Maybe it's 120. It's not very expensive, so you don't need a big studio mixer board, and it does all the processing for you, right? And it adjusts your volume and everything else. It's got a card, like a SID card in it, so you can download it into the SID card if you know what to do that. It plugs into your computer. You can get 2 mics like these, like we have, a Shure mic, or you can use, I think every restaurant could just use one of these, because these are your Yeti from Blue. These Blue Yetis. These are nice because they're USB formats, so you don't need processing. You can just grab a couple of these. They do really good. They got everything inside them, so you don't need to go buy a mixing board. But you're looking at a very low investment. A couple of mics, a couple of cameras. Like you're looking at very low cost. And then you have to find your streaming program, like where you would stream into those Apple and Spotify and stuff like this. So you're looking at I think it's $20-$30 a month, maybe, on what this is. If I look at the amount of money I used to spend in a restaurant just on the allowing the streaming radio, because I had to buy radio, streaming, it's a fraction of just that, let alone the cost that we used to have to incur in a restaurant just for marketing or branding. This is next to nothing. You can buy a couple lights for $100 if you want lights, if you need lights. And then you can do different events. You could have it streaming at you may have, like, we have a lot of these beer events or wine events or food events that your restaurant's out there participating in. You could be streaming it live from there. There's just no rules and just multiple purposes. So when you look at the equipment and everything else, you don't need much. You really don't. And I think I take that from Sean. We always bring Sean up. Sean has really made me rethink about the equipment you need, because we all want the big cameras, and we all want the big lights, and we all want the mixing boards and all these things. You don't need it. It's nice to have, don't get me wrong, but at the end of it, it's the conversation is the key, and no one's really judging you. Oh, it's fancy, you got the fancy camera, or you got the big mics and all this stuff. No one gives a batooey. And the nice thing also, when you look at some of those systems out there, I'm seeing right now walk and talk podcasts are really big. We're seeing people get creative. Like I said, this creative aspect of podcasting. I did a show called Foodies and Cars last year, where we were picking up chefs. It was so cool podcast. I don't know if you ever saw it, Scott, but we actually set up this system in their car. And then I had a chef pick up another chef from their restaurant. And then I did a podcast with them while they drove around Toronto downtown talking about the industry in their restaurant in the car while they made a dish in the passenger seat. It was a blast. And that, that action of the city going behind the windows and having, the bumps in the road and all those, we built that into the show, and it was a part of it, and we laughed, and that was awesome. So you can do them anywhere, and you can use any kind of equipment you can get your hands on that you can afford. And it's that easy.
Yeah, for sure. And it's funny, there's some people, and I've just worked out, you can see comments that are coming through in Instagram in total, live feed thing. But there's Kieran Bailey on there, and he's like, I'm having lunch at Cala Bistro in Manchester right now, and setting up a live stream of the kitchen in action would be something that I would have on in the background as I work in my office. And it's so true, right? People love to see, they love to see action. It's like the perfect probably the perfect way to kind of go, do you know what, the last 53 minutes has made our point exactly right.
Well, you know, the thing about that, so I'll tell you about that, because I think also that we need to show what's happening. Here's the beauty about that streaming your kitchen, you know, what they're doing is you stream your kitchen. I recommend everyone doing that. So this is kind of like the new open kitchen concept model. Remember open kitchens? Like we saw those really big, and then some people pulled back on that. But as we see in a restaurant, like watch people, they all have these in their hands, your phone's in your hands. So if I'm sitting there and I'm in a restaurant and I see on the table a QR code, or the server said, hey, you should watch our restaurant live stream of our kitchen in the background, then people are sitting there and also watching their food being made, and they're seeing this beautiful orchestra in the kitchen happening. Why not, right? Like, we want to see the band behind the curtains. We want to see that. Like, if you look at Be Real right now, is so big for concerts. We want to see what's happening with Taylor Swift behind the curtain. We've seen the concert model enough. We want to see what's behind the thing, behind the curtains. And I think from a restaurant, we want to see what's happening in the kitchen, the swearing, this, you know, how crazy it is. Let's tell the world how it is back there, how hard it is, and what goes into the plate that they're making for you. And then if you can get it where you get used to that, and then the servers or the chefs get comfortable with the cameras, they can start talking to the camera. Right? Hey, I'm making a pizza right now, folks. This is what we do with our pizzas here. Now you've got a streaming coming in of them talking about the amazing products they have. They're selling it for you, right? Like it's beautiful. So I believe every restaurant also not only needs a podcast, but should be streaming the kitchen nonstop and showing the world what goes on back there. Because if you sit in a kitchen and really watch what they do, it is unbelievable. It's not not what we sometimes think happens back there. It is unbelievable and dynamic and dangerous and everything else. And why not? That's good. That's good TV. Let's say it that way.
No, definitely. And I've just seen as well that my 13-year-old nephew should be at school and is actually logging on live while we're on here as well. So I'll kick his ass later on. So I won't take a screenshot for his mum. Listen, Jay, awesome. Listen, I really appreciate it, because I messaged you literally about 5 minutes before we came on and was like, how do we fancy going live on Instagram while we're doing it? Because we've just shown that going live is really easy to do. So listen, I really appreciate you coming on. If people want more advice, because you are a podcast expert, you are doing it all the time. You've helped me loads in the startup of doing mine as well. Where can people find you and get in touch?
The best is on LinkedIn. Sorry. LinkedIn is where I spend most of the time of really sharing my ideas. That's the platform. So it's under Jay Ashton, Canada's restaurant guy, on that one. And then also on Instagram under Canada's restaurant guy on Instagram as well. And I'm streaming multiple times a day. And my late night show, people can enjoy it as well. We do Monday to Friday, late night, 9:30 Eastern. And we do like that show's just crazy, because we just do we were shooting from New Jersey last night, and just have the most bizarre time. And we call it actually not a podcast, is kind of the funny part of it. So, but yeah, that's how people can reach me. And if there's any questions or anything like that, and everyone needs one. Everyone needs one.
I think we've proved that point, right? I think we've done a pretty good job of proving that. Listen, Jay, really appreciate it. Thanks again, and thanks for coming on the show. It's a real honor to have a podcast expert on here. So, thanks again.
I'll get you one of these hats, Scott.
Yeah, I think I'd look well. I think it'd cover it where I'm losing it now as well. So I think I'd look good in one of those. So yeah, awesome. And then I'm off now to go and listen to Dire Straits. Because you've got me in the mood. So yeah, I wish I had it as outro music, but maybe we'll do that on the recording for the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Scott.
You've been listening to Hospitality Huddles, where hospitality meets conversation one huddle at a time. Hospitality Huddles is brought to you in partnership with Auden Hospitality. Visit the website at www.audenhospitality.com. Thanks for listening and see you next time.